So good evening, everyone, and welcome to this first Lung Cancer Europe dialogue on how to use the LuCE reports and patient evidence to influence change. And today it is my pleasure to introduce our top-notch panelists and very good friends, Ananda, Executive Director of Patvocates Research, former CEO of Myeloma Patients Europe, current board member of Myeloma Patients Europe, among so many other positions. Then Tanja, Spanic, President of Europa, Donna, at the Europa, Donna, the European Breast Cancer Coalition, and also CEO of the Europa, Donna, Slovenia, and Diego Villalón, founder of Masque Ideas Foundation. I would like to really thank you, the three of you, very much for your valuable and precious time today to share your thoughts on the importance of using evidence to influence change in the healthcare and patient advocacy to meet our final goal, which is, in the end, improving the lives of people who are going through a tough and rough situation, like the diagnosis of a serious disease like a cancer or a chronic disease. So before we get started, I would like to give our attendees, and I thank you all for attending this interesting dialogue, just a brief overview on how this is gonna work. So the session will last for about an hour, and we'll make some introductory questions to each of our panelists. And then we'll have a fluent debate. So Ananda, Tanja, and Diego, feel free to intervene at any time. And also for those of you attending the dialogue today, at any given time, you can raise your questions. So you have two different ways to do so. If you would like to make your questions live by using your microphone, you just have to press the raise hand option in the bottom part of your screen, and then I'll unmute you when it is your turn. Or if you prefer to send your questions in writing, you have two ways to do so. If you prefer to do those questions anonymously, you can use the Q&A button. So I will receive the question and I'll read it to the speakers. Or if you prefer to just publish it in the chat, just use the chat window and I'll read them to our panelists. Also, there is a new feature now that we are using Zoom webinar, which is to enable the live transcription in the bottom bar, so you can read the subtitles automatically, just in case language is not native language, or if you prefer to read what we're saying. Finally, I would like to remember that this section can be followed at our Facebook page, so I will also be following up if there are any questions there. So feel free to share the link in your walls or through other social media networks so we can enlarge our reach. So being said that, and without any further ado, I wish you all a very fruitful session. And I'll start with my first question that goes to Diego. So Diego, in the past few years, also I mentioned you are the founder of the Masque Ideas Foundation, but you are also a member of LuCE. Your organization is a member of LuCE, and you have been partnering with us to develop and produce several reports and position papers focusing on trending topics in the lung cancer community and emphasizing the importance of gathering the perspective of people impacted by the disease, not just patients, but also those in a caregiving capacity. So given your background, how valuable you find producing this evidence, and how do you think it can improve the outcomes for the community?
Well, first, thank you so much, Alfonso and LuCE, for giving me the opportunity to share my insights about this important issue for all the patient advocacy community. As you say, well, it's a pleasure to share this webinar with Tanja and Ananda, of course. As you say, I've been involved in different projects developed by Lung Cancer Europe for the last 8 years, more or less. And my experience said that LuCE, as many other patient organizations, has understood the importance of gathering data that comes directly from patients and caregivers. For this reason, LuCE, for the last 7 years, has developed annual reports with the purpose of raising awareness related to the challenges that face people with impacted by this disease. We are currently working in the 7th report of Lung Cancer Europe, which is a descriptive research analysis to explore the experiences and the preferences of people with lung cancer in Europe related to the care pathway. So one of the objectives is to understand what are their experiences from lung cancer presentation and diagnosis to treatment and follow-up. But Lung Cancer Europe have been also promoted at some other projects to collect valuable data, as for example, the position paper developed in 2020 to identify disparities and challenges to access to lung cancer diagnosis and treatment across Europe. So LuCE has a very good expertise and experience in collecting data from patients. My own organization, Mass KDS Foundation, has been involved in different research projects to capture the perspective and experience of people affected by disease. So I think that every time more and more patient organizations are involved in this type of initiatives, and they are more familiar with this type of research. This could be surveys, this could be focus groups, interview. There are many different techniques to collect data that comes directly from patients and caregivers, and this is a really valuable information for different reasons. One of them is because we can provide valuable data that clinical research doesn't usually provide. I mean, the experience of patients can contribute to understanding the nature of a disease, the effects of a specific treatment, or even the repercussions on the patient and caregiver's life. So it is important to understand that we can contribute to the knowledge that the scientific and healthcare community have about a specific group of population. It is well known in the advocacy community that what really matters to patients is not always what healthcare professionals think that is more important for patients. And we know that thanks to the patient evidence, and this is important. Gathering patient evidence provides information, for example, about the safety of a specific treatment, and it plays a function in the pharmacovigilance, but it also has a clear function in our advocacy activities. I mean, we need to understand what people need and what people prioritize in order to advocate for and influence for change in healthcare, in politics, in research, etc., etc., etc. So I think that this is important even for our own organization, because we need to consider the patient needs and priorities and caregivers' needs and priorities in order to do our action plans, our strategy, our priorities, etc., etc.
Thank you so much, Diego, for this introduction. I think you summarized that very well. So next I'm going with you, Ananda. Welcome again. So Ananda, before your current role, you did a massive job running Myeloma Patients Europe, an organization that I think has served the European advocacy community, and I would say the worldwide community, to prove that patient evidence cannot just impact our primary target, who are patients, but also the way other stakeholders value the patient preferences and the needs in a relevant and measurable way. So what would you consider the highest learnings and also the challenges and barriers throughout this long way?
Well, thank you, Alfonso, and thank you, LuCE, for the invitation. So, I mean, MPE, which is the organization I know best, as you said, is a very good example of the potential that any patient organization really has to inform decision-making with the evidence that they're able to generate. I mean, there's lots of it has been said by Diego already, but I think really it is about ensuring that you incorporate or that you're able to elicit evidence on patients' needs, on patient wants, on their fears, on their willingness to take risks, on their willingness to accept side effects, what quality of life means to them, and all of what Diego said before. And I think this kind of intelligence, just like he said before, it's really, really important. I think it was an absolute critical point that Diego made before, is that that kind of intelligence is not only meant to inform other decision makers, such as, the researchers, regulators, payers or HTA bodies, or the clinical practice, it is also and can also be very valuable information for us on how to lead a patient organization, and on what our mission is, on what our vision is, our values, our key objectives. What should those be as a patient organization? We can't just make them up, they need to come from somewhere. But I think maybe what I would think, if talking about evidence, it might be worth just taking a step back and asking ourselves, why are we in advocacy at all? And so when I think about that, it's like we become patient advocates, or we set up a patient organization because we feel the need, an urge to do something that has an impact beyond our own disease, our own needs, our own desires or fears, or the challenges that we experience as a patient or as a carer. And when we do that, we rarely, when we become advocates, we rarely think about the fact that switching from being a carer or a patient to becoming an advocate carries with it a huge responsibility, and that is to represent an entire group, that might not think like yourself. Might yes, but might also not. And so it's really important to keep that in mind. And so it becomes really important to understand what these different needs are of the different groups of people that you're representing or you're meant to represent. And there might be subgroups who might, be divided by age, or by a social or economic status, or whether they work, or whether they have small children, they care for someone, and on and on. There might sometimes even be factors or subgroups that you don't even think about, that come up once you ask questions, and you suddenly see differences that you didn't even think about. And so being open, I think, and not patronizing becomes really, really important when you ask the patient community. And so I would say, if you ask me about what are the learnings that I have at MPE, I think it's really important to constantly listen to what the patient community has to say, and to not be patronizing, and don't make any assumptions. That is super important. A hypothesis is always helpful to carry out your research, but assumptions aren't. At least that's the experience that I've had. And probably another one that I can think of is that an important learning is that collecting data early on is critical, because that is the right moment in time, you speak to all decision makers, so you understand when you can have the highest impact, when that data isn't, used for yourself, and make sure that you have the data ready by that moment in time, and don't wait until it's too late and say, oh, they didn't tell us. I think you need to be really proactive as a patient community, because no one's going to be waiting. And then the other thing that I can think of that is, really important is using the right methodology for the purpose. And here, at least the experience that I've had, is that we have a tendency to over-engineer when we think about generating patient evidence. And Diego made mention of this before. The truth is that valuable patient evidence doesn't always have to be generated in a form, of something highly technical, like a patient preference study, or methodologically the absolute golden standard, or maybe statistically totally relevant. I think what we've learned is that sometimes the only thing it will take to get a group of patients, together into a room, lock them up and ask them for their opinion, might be enough for the purpose that you have in mind. or a small survey monkey. So I think my piece of advice would be to, first focus on the data you're looking for and what you need the data for, and then start thinking about what the methodology is that you need to, impact that decision making. Because if you do it the other way around, you might be wasting your time, your resources. And that was more or less the, I think, the learnings. When it comes to challenges, there are some challenges attached. I mean, we started creating the evidence generation unit, and I can tell you that probably the biggest challenge that we encountered was one that we spoke about before, which is not making any assumptions. I think that's probably one of the biggest ones when you generate evidence. It was like, the big assumption when I was working in sexuality or fertility, to assume that 60-year-olds don't have sex. You just assume, and then it turns out not to be true, and you're surprised. So I think hypothesis yes, assumption no. It's also very difficult, especially for advocates who are patients themselves, to understand that they still need evidence despite having gone through the disease themselves, and to also accept that there's others that might just think differently. That's really important, and also a challenge. And probably the last big one before I shut up, the last one is, measuring impact. The last one is around measuring impact, that you also refer to when you were asking the question. And it's probably something that we haven't been brilliant at doing at MPE, despite trying really, really, really hard, I can tell you. And it has to do a bit with the fact that, decisions are taken in a non-transparent manner somehow. So knowing how you influence the regulator or a payer is not easy, but very often it also has to do with our own behavior as advocates, and with ticking the box once the data is out. It's like you've targeted the stakeholder in question, you check your to-do lists, X has been lobbied, European Parliament, tack, you check it. When actually the ultimate goal is not lobbying as such or advocating, but provoking change, changing someone's mind, informing a decision. So, so that decision is the best possible decision for patients. And I think that's really important to keep in mind, and something that there's many more challenges, but I think those are the main ones that I can come up with.
Thanks, Ananda, because I think it was a very comprehensive and very honest answer. I have to say that this, and it may lead the dialogue into a debate later, which I think it's good, because you raise very, very interesting points, like, for example, this active listening, how to do it to really see exactly what you want to do, the difference between the individual preferences of a patient versus evidence, all these kind of things that seems to be like a common challenge for us. We'll come back for that, but now I would like to go with Tanja. So Tanja, it's great to have you here, because I think you combine many different hats, apart from being like such a great person, such a great friend. Your insights could be very valuable for discussion. On one side, you were diagnosed years ago with the breast cancer, so you know by yourself what it feels to be a patient. Well, the four of us here, we are patients, which is good. Then you have become an active advocate at national and international level at the Europa, Donna, as well as participated in other advocacy networks. You've been member for the last 5 years, if I'm correct, at the ESMO patient advocacy working group. And you also have a background in research with a PhD in neuroscience. So I'm sure this great mix can really help us understanding the importance of incorporating a true solid basis of patient evidence to change things for the benefit of people living with a serious or with a chronic disease. So what would be your main thoughts on this?
First, thank you, Alfonso, for the invitation and, of course, for this great event you are organizing. And I have to say that I can just second all that Diego and Ananda just said. Being a patient advocate is really different than being a patient with experience of cancer or a caregiver. This really changes the role. How do we understand really what we do? And I really strongly agree with Ananda with this following of our impact, what we are doing, because sometimes we really try our very hard to make a change or to influence something. And then when we tickle that box, we forget to follow up. This is really, really important. So, but going from this part, what we really do, I would just like to add that maybe working on this international and European levels are way different than when we work on our national levels. Of course, everybody follow all the news and we educate ourselves. We go there, we listen to the news that are coming, all the new drugs and therapy, we try to understand them. And here is the point I want to tackle with my scientific background that you mentioned. It's really hard to understand all of this, how to follow all of these new procedures, how to then disseminate this information to our community, how to translate this from really scientific language to common language that every single patient or caregiver would understand. Well, this is probably one of our very important topics as we meet each other, the four of us and so many other patient advocates on European and international level. When we get all of this knowledge, how we will disseminate or inform our members in our countries, and how we will communicate with all other decision makers or stakeholders. It's really hard. I have to say that it was also challenging for me as a scientist because I understood everything and I found myself explaining to patients again in a very scientific language. So I also had to study hard. And here I would like to thank Eupati and the Eupati Toolbox, which helped me really a lot, how to translate this and explain to people. And then I did a very simple thing. I used my mother. So she's from financial field, no knowledge of medicine or biology just as a common person, of course, but no detailed knowledge. And I tested everything on her. And I said, if she will understand me, if she will know what I'm talking about and what I want to explain, either a new therapy or some procedure, then I'm sure that most of the people would understand me. And I struggled with that more than 3 years to get my language to get so simple and on a level that really I can explain to people. And that's what I'm struggling now very hard with other doctors, you know, like, okay, explain this, what is infection, explain what is anemia, you know, you have to be able to explain to patients what these words, they're not big words, but like, okay, what's cancer? Try to explain in a very simple few sentences what cancer is. And it's really hard. That's maybe, I don't know if you have noticed, but in ESMO, in Annals of ESMO, we started with a lay language summaries of the papers. So this is some small steps that also experts and scientists are recognizing the importance of patient advocates, because we are the ones, we are actually the bridge between either medical community or policymakers, and then in the end with the patients, because not every single patient has access to Congress, to conference, or to all these materials, but we are the one that are transmitting this to them. And this is also a tool for all our colleagues that they can use, and then they can spread all of this knowledge. But if it's not available, it's very hard to access it. So I think that this is not just one of the challenges that we are facing, but also that we are not sleeping, you know, in our fields, that we keep educating ourselves, of course, and that we try to disseminate this and really achieve this, that this information comes to the people that need it, not to that stays somewhere in the air and that's it, you know. As that I'm going back to Ananda's ticking the box. Okay, we did that. We translated the summaries of the papers, and that's it. You know, that's only the beginning of our work being done.
Yeah, I completely understand you. I think we sometimes, being many years involved in advocacy, makes you feel that you give things for granted, and also it's difficult sometimes to have some fresh thinking when innovating and when really doing these things. So we're not going to I'm going now to launch some open questions for debate and dialogue. I just want to remind our audience that please, if you have any comment, you would like to participate, just raise your hand, use the chat, use the Q&A, because I think this is more open like just a webinar. So it's absolutely open. It's not going to be like a Q&A session at the end or something like that. So if you feel you would like to share some of your thoughts on what we're speaking, please do it at any given time. So I'm just sending the next question. So whoever wants to start, I'm very happy to follow you. So this is probably my perception, it's not evidence, that we gather good quality data, that sometimes sadly remains on reports, nice papers, nice presentations, but it's not being widely used by the patient community. I mean, sometimes I have thought about the causes. Maybe sometimes it's a problem of not co-creating things with some other people, and this is something that we do on our own. But sometimes when we have done that, it seems that we are not tackling, I'm not sure if we are not tackling the right goal. And sometimes I'm surprised by the fact that our evidence is being used by other stakeholders, but not patient advocates. So how do you think this can be improved? How do you think we can really make this evidence more useful and more to be used by the patient community to influence change? And whoever wants to start, I think.
Well, I guess, well, Ananda and Tanja said before that we should try to avoid that thing of tech in a project development, like to say we need to do this and this and this. So I agree with Ananda has said before about we need to the objective of no matter the objective of this research project, we need to get some change in health policy, in research, in different spheres. I mean, but we need to think that the advocacy work is a long-term work. I mean, you can collect some very valuable data, but this is nothing if you don't work every day in a regular basis with decision-making bodies, with regulators. So I think that the first thing is to think that a research project is part of our advocacy work. I mean, there is no an end. And if we want that that the advocacy patient community get actively involved in these projects, firstly, we should invite them to get involved in the project since the first stage, to help organizations to identify the priorities of our research, the objectives, what we want to, what type of data we want to collect, or what our objective of the project. And my experience is that all these organizations that are actively involved in the project during the different stages and different phases, they disseminate and promote the results in a more, I don't know, in a large way than other patient organizations. But also we need to think that there are different ways to promote the evidence of patients, like, for example, like translating the materials, as Tanja said before, and also to increase the visibility of this organization in these materials, also to share some resources that help them to advocate at a national level, like, for example, press releases, or some, I don't know, educational tools to help them to advocate in a better way and using these materials. But I think that this is like something that it happens in many different projects, that some part of the community doesn't use these results. So I think that this is something that we need to analyze and understand why it's happening that.
Yeah, if I may compliment, I think also for, moving away from just those nice reports and glossy papers that then sit on the shelf and no one looks at, only go in your activity report at the end of the year, or is sent, back to your sponsors. So, you tick the box. I think what is really important, and we referred to that previously, is what's the objective? What are you trying to achieve? And start with the end in mind. So, start with what you want to achieve in mind, and then go backwards and make a plan, because very often tools and vehicles, are confused with objectives. And the same happens with a report. A report is not an objective. A report is a tool to achieve something, because a report won't save anyone's life. And, it depends on what you do with the report. And so very often, I think our mistake is that we say, oh, let's do a report. What are we going to write in the report? Rather than saying, okay, what do I want to achieve? I want to change this. What's the best way of achieving that? And then it might be a report, but it might be something different. And then obviously measuring impact, which we also, it's very easy to say and very difficult to do. But I think that would be the last piece of advice, on moving away from the glossiness and truly having impact, is seeing whether you've actually managed to achieve all or some bits or nothing at all. That means that next time you need to maybe rethink.
Yes, I also perfectly agree with both of you. And what we saw maybe as one of the ways how we try to do is that we constantly use different channels to try to reach different people, because even our colleagues, the advocates from other countries, maybe they don't like to use all the social media, or some of them are just on social media, or they prefer a printed version, like Ananda said, maybe some report or PDF on mailing. But then definitely what works best is in-person meeting or something in-person let's say training or education, where we share this. But then again, we come back to this measuring impacts and what we've done and how to measure this. I think that this is really hard to measure and to see what we've really done. But at the end of the day or end of the year, we really have to ask ourselves, what are we doing and what's the impact that we are leaving behind? Or is this our work just, working for ourselves, or do we really, I believe that we really do a big impact, at least on the national levels. It's probably easier to measure this, because then you see the real outcome, like access to the new drug or to the new therapy. But on the international levels, it's maybe harder, or I don't know, improvement in some care or access to some care. But if we don't try and if we don't do this, maybe it's even harder, or we won't do anything. So that's why I'm really happy about this, that some things are changing, like this lay languages explanations that we really try to disseminate through different channels. And still, I'm sure that we are not reaching enough people, because even my friends that I ask among us, if they saw that, they're like, oh, maybe I saw it, but then I tried to click it and it was something behind the you have to log in. Okay, then I urged, please remove this. Why they have to log in just to see the simple explanation summary of the lay language summaries of the papers, but there are some really stupid obstacles, if you can say like that. Even myself, if I go there and I have to log in to read some summaries, I'm like, oh, I'm not going to do this. This is just one more step that I'm not willing to do, to read some short summaries. So I think that we should open this, I don't know, put it on Twitter, Facebook, wherever, and invite people to click on them. And then they will say, oh, maybe also this journal has also something like that. We have to probably adapt to also to different communities, different age groups, different needs of patients and caregivers, and try to come as close as possible to their levels and their channels that they are using.
Yeah, I must say about what it was said before, that I really agree that a report is not an advocacy, it's only an advocacy tool. It's not an objective. And I think that the only way to use a report as a tool is to have clear our strategy. But I don't know if this happens to you. I speak to the three of you, but also to the people that are watching this video, that we are always very busy working in the today, all the work that we have to do. And I think that it's really important to stop a little bit, to redefine our objectives and to think about what we want to achieve, not in the next year, in 3 or 5 years. That's something concrete, not be very ambitious sometimes. Because sometimes it's like, well, our vision is that one, but our vision is something like very impossible, I mean. So we need to establish some goals. So I think that the best thing is to define a strategy that we can, because we are working year to year. And it's like, well, what we are going to do this year, because what we are going to present to our members, to our sponsors. We have a lot of stakeholders around us. And this sometimes produces that we establish projects, but we don't offer any continuity. I mean, and it's important to define a strategy, and the report can be a tool to include in that strategy.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, and I think it will really link with my next question, but before that, I would like to summarize two important facts that you mentioned. One of them is about the thinking about what you are producing more as a tool or as a way to achieve your objective rather than the goal itself. And here it comes like an anecdote of a person who I won't mention, but I think the four of us know, which suddenly jump into a pharmaceutical company conference with the cow livers and smashing to the table just because this pharmaceutical company was not giving access to a drug that could save lives of people. And it really worked. And not, disclaimer, LuCE is not in favor of smashing cow livers in the table of anybody to achieve your objectives. But what I wanted to say in a part is that there might be different channels to do your advocacy. Then I think, Tanja, you mentioned a really good point, which is about marketing ourselves. It's not just producing like super rocket science things. If at the end of the day, people is not able to access those things, it's more about facilitating the access to what we produce to people so they are able to understand, they are able to get it, they are able to use it. And last that you mentioned, and I would like to link with what you just said, Diego, I think it's very important. Yeah, we are really focusing on the daily work, and it's sometimes a little bit difficult to have a kind of long-term view. And we know from experience that many patient organizations, including us, are limited in terms of resources, not just financial, but also human, but also skill, capacities, knowledge, and so on. So especially I'm thinking about some of the attendees that we're having today here that may come from national organizations or small organizations. Which tips would you think that they might be useful for them to take advocacy one step beyond if they are willing to not just play the traditional, and don't get me wrong, because I think it's important, role of providing information and peer support, to move one step beyond and say, hey, let's start trying to change things by doing something, by doing advocacy, which at the end of the day is what we're trying to do. Do things for changing people's lives. So anyone would like to start?
I'll go. although I'm sure that the other two can respond to this question much better than I do. I would probably say that the first absolutely essential box you need to tick, but truly and meaningfully tick, is understanding your disease, understanding your pipeline, understanding who takes what decision, and choosing or understanding, identifying which decision you would like to inform or have a say in. And obviously understand when that decision will be taken. So until when can you influence? And when you know that, I think things become much clearer and easier. You can, develop a strategy, like Diego said, and which can be simple or complex depending on how big the organization is and your resources. And then I think the other big one I would say in this case, and these are really simple things, I mean, you could do that from your kitchen table, which I do anyhow, but I think it's about starting to ask your patient community about what is important to them, and don't overthink it. Start simple. 5 questions in a Survey Monkey is better than, spending lots of time and money on something super complex. And then you can increase the complexity gradually if you think it's necessary. But I think those would be my 2 main points.
Yeah, I would definitely agree on this. And what I'm also thinking about is, as Ananda said, also identifying all of your stakeholders, because, or just simply knowing your health system, because, for example, when you are diagnosed with cancer and you barely visited a doctor before that, even as a patient, you don't have a clue how actually the health system works before you truly enters it. And also as a patient advocate, who decides about the, registration of the drugs, who do the access, who for the reimbursement, who is actually the part of all of this. And once, I totally agree with you, Ananda, just put a paper on the table and start writing, and try identify really maybe, I would say at least 10 stakeholders that you have to deal with them, and don't forget about your community. What you, Ananda, already mentioned at the very beginning is probably our personal ideas or personal needs are not the same as they are for the whole community. And what Diego pointed out at the beginning, 25 or maybe 30 years ago, doctors were patient advocates. So they were advocating and discussing about things and topics that they thought that were relevant for patients. But now we know, and we know it pretty well, that that's not the same. But that we really have to know what our needs are and what we try to address. And maybe, I don't know if we are thinking about our impact, I would totally agree with Diego that we have to set goals that are really reachable. And maybe if we set 2 or 3 goals and continue, that's why we try to repeat. Maybe we feel like, oh, this is just a thing that we've done for the past 2 years, we can stop now. But no, new patients are coming daily. New patient advocates are coming daily. And don't forget, new stakeholders, new politicians are coming daily. So we have to repeat ourselves and continue good work that we've been doing for years, and maybe adding some new improvements on that. Sometimes I really feel like I'm talking about the same things for the past 10 years about prevention, about the access to the treatment. And then I realized that the new patients are looking at me like, what you are talking about? That's the exactly thing that we are maybe so much into this that we forget about this very essential things and needs that they have once they become cancer patients or caregivers.
Yeah, just to say that I completely agree. And looking for specific issues related to gathering patient evidence, my suggestion would be learning by practice. I mean, This is something that is really useful. And I think that this is a new world for many patient advocates. So I would suggest to start reading papers, articles, because it will help to become more familiar with methodologies, with the terms, and also with the methodologies, the most common objectives or the different techniques to collect data. So it would be very, very useful. And also, as Ananda said before, my suggestion is that many research projects require a lot of human, financial resources, but if we don't have that resources, we can start doing small things. I mean, she talked before about a meeting with patients, but it can be also an online survey in a free online platform about a specific issue, trying not to be very ambitious, okay? A specific issue. And another suggestion would be not to design a survey, because I sometimes find people that think that a good survey can be designed in 1 week. And that's not true. I mean, it takes a lot of weeks, some months even. So take time to do a good literature research and to define very good questions and respond options and ask for help, because there are many advocates right there, or many clinicians or collaborators that can help you to design an appropriate survey on an appropriate focus group. So I encourage all of you to ask for help to people that can help you and offer guidance if you want to collect some data.
Thank you for the response. If we're going to the next question, we have received one question from the audience. I saw, Ananda, your response on writing, but I just want to read it to both Tanja and Diego as well. So the question is, how would you address different national patient advocates to use European level developed materials once the barriers are different in countries, or the barriers in different countries may differ? Reports contain many different information, but is seen as a very wide document to be used. On the other hand, creating one-pagers usually comes down to limiting the amount of data on it. And I think your responses would be very interesting, because you're working, Ananda and Tanja, you are more working on more kind of European level. Diego, you have been more in touch with national organizations. So I would like to know your perspectives on this particular issue.
Well, yeah, I think it's a very good topic and issue, and that's what actually we are facing daily. Europa, Donna has 47 member countries. That's way beyond the European Union. So that's 47 different health systems, and we provide materials for all of them. I think that first, why I pointed up that you have to know your environment, your national stakeholders. It's not the same in every country. Who are the agencies? What does the ministry, who does what? First, then I think that you have to identify your environment, your own stakeholders in your country, and then you can see what you can implement or use as an advocacy tool, or let's say topic, or your goal on the national level. But what we do on European level, we follow the new guidelines. We follow the new, let's say, in screening, which is very simple, in breast cancer screening, we advocate for the standard of care. What should be a standard of care? We cannot say, okay, in Slovenia, in Spain, in Italy, you are going to do it like this or this and this. That's impossible from the European level. We can say the standard of care is when the screening starts, or what kind of machines you have to use, who needs to read this, blah, 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 blah. And then these standards should be implemented on the national level. And then our national delegates, national representatives, however we can call them, come in their part, and where they play a very important part, because from European organization it's very hard to influence every single country and to go to every single decision makers. But we can provide a strong evidence-based tool, again, translated to lay language, and in one pager or maybe a few pages, what are the main goals, and empower this national patient advocates to work on their level, and maybe move one thing after another. What this, I think, is one of the main obstacles or challenges, but there are so many more when you go deeper in your projects.
Good. So I have two questions left. So I was thinking, because we are running out of time, whether to go with the easy one or the provocative one. And of course, I'm going with the provocative one to make it like a kind of more debate. So it's about something that we have mentioned before, which is about the active listening. In our umbrellas, we do have many different voices, many different, I would say, points of view on how to do patient advocacy or how to support patients and so on. So my question is, do you feel individual patient stories or anecdotal, what's called anecdotal data, can be useful to enrich insights when generated evidence or to serve as a basis of hypotheses to do more in-depth research? Or would you recommend to avoid these as much as possible? So who wants to start first? Because I'm the moderator here, so I'm not allowed.
I'll give it a go, and then probably Diego would say rubbish, Ananda. So, I mean, Alfonso, you know my opinion about anecdotal reporting. So this is like, but I have to say, I'm not gonna hit the same drum that I always do, because I do think that anecdotes enrich evidence. They give a face to the evidence that you're using, submitting, and I would probably not use anecdotes instead of evidence. Well, because of the reasons that we've discussed before, it doesn't make you, very credible. You're only telling one story, not the story of, a larger population. So if possible, always accompany anecdotes with hardcore data. And I don't know, I think that the anecdote or, the anecdote will become the human face of your data, so to say, and that can be a strength.
Good say, Ananda. So anyone else?
Yeah, I agree with Ananda. I mean, personal stories, that is not evidence, okay, but it doesn't mean that it's not valuable. I mean, I think that personal stories are really important for advocacy because different reasons. I mean, for instance, I'm a social worker. I speak with patients, with caregivers, and thanks to these discussions, many ideas have come, or many needs have emerged. And thanks to all this discussion, we have promoted some specific projects. So I think personal stories are important. And also I really like what Ananda said before, because it's a way also to identify research priorities or even to humanize research. I mean, if we want to use patient evidence to raise awareness on society, for instance, I think the personal stories are really useful because you can provide a number, you can provide a percentage, but if you also show a personal story to explain these numbers, I think that this is an important tool to influence a change on society, because numbers are important to inform, but if we want to raise awareness, personal stories can be better sometimes. So I think that this is something important. And also to conclude in my part is like these stories have a unique knowledge, especially in rare diseases, or even when we talk about very specific subtypes of disease that that now you can say that you have lung cancer, but what is important is to understand what subtype of lung cancer you have, if there is any mutation associated to the disease. So I think that personal stories can be very important for small groups of patients.
Yeah, I could also agree with both of you, and probably most of us are in this work in patient advocacy because of our personal stories and personal experiences. But I think that sometimes these single stories are very powerful in media, and we can get attention but for doing work like advocacy on some other levels, or in, like both of you said, we really need numbers and really the needs, but to get attention and to get this space in the media, well, at least from my experience, personal stories are one that are actually working there. And then when you present the personal story, as Diego said, then you can use this space to go on and to actually do or bring your message you want to bring as an advocacy group.
Thank you so much for three of you. So as we have 5 minutes left, I think what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give each of you like the opportunity to say a closing remark. I might say first that, I mean, it's been a real pleasure to share your knowledge. I think I felt in my objective in just giving to provoke kind of debate, because I think we are very aligned. We have known each other for many years, and I think we have very similar ideas on this, but I think it's very, very fruitful to put all this together. But before ending the session, I'm just gonna start on the reverse order, so I'm going to each one of you the possibility to have a closing remark. So in this case, Tanja, if you would like to start first, I just give you the floor.
Yes, first, I really would like to thank you for inviting us and bringing us together today. It was really nice to see all of you, at least virtually, in this format. And I think that we have to first ourselves appreciate our work, what we do and what we bring to the whole community, and then we can do all that we discussed today. We really agree on on all these things, because we see the problems that are raising in different cancer communities, but then we see that this is the problem actually for all chronic non-communicable diseases. It's not just the cancer that is facing this kind of problems. And on the other hand, we barely tackled, or we didn't even tackle the data that we would like to discuss. And sharing data, I know that we've been bombarded from all sides, how we should share our data, what this will bring to our community, what this will bring to new research. I will just say that before we close, I would like to say that we have to be very careful with this. From one side, as a scientist, I would say, yeah, go for it. And we need data and we need everything to share to save as many lives as possible. But on the other hand, as an individual and as a patient, I would say I would be very careful in this. Maybe this is something that we will discuss in some other meetings or somewhere else where we meet, but I think that this is the thing that is also in our power to talk about and to see what we can do in this. But for now, thank you, Alfonso, and thank you, Diego and Ananda, for this great event and coffee break for all of us today.
Thank you so much, Tanja. So Ananda, I give you the floor now so you can make your closing remark.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to discuss such an important topic today. So just a couple of points, and I think we've touched upon them, but just as a conclusion mode, I would say that we need to understand that evidence is not just a nice to have exercise, but that it is a responsibility of all of us to tackle it. It won't happen if we just do it for a glamorous report ending on the shelf. It's a responsibility of anyone leading an organization or representing a group of patients, even if you don't have an organization, to really know exactly what the important topics and what the needs and wants of the patient group is. And I'd say, having said that, evidence can really help you to make internal decisions, not only influence external stakeholders. And I think also one point that we tackled today, and that I think is an important takeaway message, is that generating evidence is not rocket science. It can be very complex, but it doesn't have to be complex. So start with the simple things. Remembering also that decision makers also generate evidence. It's not only us, and that it's worth trying to partner with them while they do that. As a typical example of that we haven't discussed is, clinical trials, measuring quality of life in clinical trials. We can have a huge impact by early on influencing that, so you don't have to deal with it later when you have the problem. And then probably my last point would be around, using evidence in a smart way with the end in mind and not using tools as objectives.
Thank you so much, Ananda, for that closing remark. I 100% agree with you. And last but not least, Diego, final words.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Alfonso and LuCE, for giving us the time to discuss about patient evidence and how important this is to influence change in politics, in healthcare, and even in our own organizations. I think that it's really positive that more and more organizations are involved in research and gathering patient evidence, and this is really important, but we need to continue improving our work and to change. We shouldn't work more, we should work better. And this is important. And for me, one of the main conclusions is the sentence of Ananda, that report is like a tool to get an objective. And I think that that's a clear message. And also for people that are watching this video, if you have expertise and knowledge about this type of initiatives, please help to others, to other patient organizations. And if you don't have these resources, ask for help, because we are all part of this community and we should help each other. So let's continue working together, because it's the only way to face the common challenges that we have.
Thank you, Diego. And with this final message of keeping working hard, collaboration, co-creation, I would like to bring this session to the end. I would really like to thank the three of you again for your willingness to participate. And it's been a real pleasure as always. I really hope that the next time that we meet, we do that in person, and we can have that with a fresh drink and give ourselves the hype that COVID has prevented us for like a couple of long years. And I would really like to thank all the attendees for joining us today. I think it's been a super fruitful session, the first LuCE dialogue, so it's a milestone in LuCE history, which is great. And the full recording of this session will be uploaded shortly to the YouTube, to our YouTube channel, so you can watch it again as many times you want. I would especially like to remind you that you can share it among your contacts and so on. And I would really like to encourage you to stay tuned to our social media channels: Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Instagram, as well as to our website, which is www.lungcancereuro.eu, to know our latest project and activities. And wishing you all the lucky ones good and nice summer break. And I really wish to see you all very soon in our upcoming activities. So thank you again very much, Tanja, Ananda, and Diego. Thank you, our audience, and have a great evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, you too.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.